Hello everyone. Welcome to my teaching learning session with me Sonal Singh. I'm going to start today with Foundation of Psychology BPCC 131. Speaking of foundation of psychology, like the term suggests, it's going to be the foundation of where psychology came from, what psychology is defined as, and what are the different branches and areas that it started with. So let's begin with understanding the foundation gives us what kind of knowledge. See, foundation aims at providing us knowledge, understanding of the discipline of what psychology is all about in detail. To us, its origin is found in its evolution. We need to know psychology has not come up as a subject directly as study of human mind and soul. It has evoluted with the time and come up to the frontal. Also, it focuses on how psychology in today's life functioning, supporting and benefiting us in the various fields. Throws light on the application of how psychology is utilized, how it is applied to the different, the setup of the world that we are living in, how are the theories learned and applied in the society. Let's understand what do we understand by the term psychology. As starting with the foundation, psychology comes from two words. It is coming from the Greek word psych and logos. Logos obviously is something which is knowledge or science, and psych means the soul, the soul. So I need to go back to the 1800s and 56 and 1867. It was realized that psychology initially was identified as the psyche being the mind. Later, the Greek term defined us that psychology, the psyche in the psychology is associated to the soul. So ideally, psychology is the study of the soul, also can be transferred to psychology of the mind. Scientifically, psychology is defined as the science of behavior, overt or covert behavior, experiences, and mental processes. So, in a just, if we find out that psychology is what scientifically, we need to know scientifically it studies behaviors, it studies our experiences, the kind of experiences, subjective, objective, positive, negative experiences that we have, and also mental processes, which is divided into the mind and the brain. So now let's understand that what is the nature of psychology. Nature of psychology, as I stated, is divided into natural science and social science. A lot of psychologists have emphasized that psychology has to be both. It has to be both a natural and a social science. So, speaking of that, we need to know that the origin of psychology lies in biology, philosophy, and also physiology. The first subject to be coming as a beginner is always philosophy. Philosophy was one of those subjects where it started saying the what, hows, and whens of the world started. So, to understand psychology, being a natural science, we need to understand the main assumption called hypothetical deductive reasoning. The hypothetical deductive reasoning suggests us that it's a natural science. How? Any justification or any natural justification of a theory, an assumption, is always backed by an experience. So psychology is all the scientific advancement, all the assertions, all the assumptions were backed by a theory. So everything that psychology was stating about the human mind, about the human soul, about mental experiences and processes was always having an underlying concept of a theory. Also, psychology is a natural science which studies people in society and how a particular society influences on how people think and behave. The researchers uses experiments, follows all precautions of scientific observation and control, and interprets the result with the help of quantitative or something which is statistical techniques. So we need to know psychology is quantitative. So when we talk about psychology being quantitative, we need to know there would be stats involved, there would be information involved which analyzed, it could be observed, it could be interpreted, and it could be equally controlled. Control gives us a high platform stating that psychology, ideally can be quantified. So once an experiment is able to control, give a lab like condition, we need to know any kind of control provides scientificness in psychology. So this was about psychology being a natural science or a science. Also, let's understand the difference between the two. How did we say who's better? Is it the psychology being a natural science better? Is it being, psychology being a social science better? Ideally, we do not compare the two, but it can be stated that natural science is a branch of science which deals with the physical world. the physical world talks about the subjects like physics, chemistry, biology. All of these, subjects are dealing with the physical world that we are a part of. Also, as I said, it includes subjects like chemistry, physics, earth science, astronomy, even biology. Also, when we talk about natural science, it will always be using scientific methods. So we need to know it's always going to be quantitative analysis, there's going to be stats involved, we will come down to numbers. We want approximation. We never do anything which is on the basis of natural and very qualitative. Because when we are talking about the science to be like physics, chemistry, and biology, we need to have something which is observable, can be tested, can be verified. For that being tested and verified, your science should be using scientific methods and quantitative analysis. So, here, when we talk about people who study psychology as a natural science, will become, and using natural science ideally will lead to subjects and careers like doctors, engineers, nurses, chemists, astronomers, medical doctors, also astrochemists, etc. Now let's compare. Is it there a difference between natural science and social science? So how do we compare the two? When talking about psychology as a social science is the study of society and social human beings, which is the study of social relationships, society. Also, it includes fields like political science, sociology. Sociology is so closely related to psychology, economics, geography, history, and law. At the same time, they also use scientific method, but at the same time, there are some quality methods which are used. They are scientific in nature, but the kind of data that comes in is quality. But the kind of data that comes in natural science, those scientific methods gives you quantitative data that can be estimated in numbers. And when we talk about use of scientific method here, as well, the scientific method which is used in social science are equally scientific, equally giving us approximation, but they are quality. They are focusing on quality subjects. Also, here, what do the students will become? They become psychologists, they become historians, they become lawyers, journalists, teachers, accountants, etc. So this is like a kind of balance that we are trying to tell, that psychology can be seen as both. Psychology can be seen as a social science and a natural science. Like a very amazing fact that we all should know. Psychology in some part of the country, which is India, is seen as a social science. It could be considered under the School of Humanities. In some areas, in some world, it is considered as the School of Science. So, see, psychology can fit in both the groups. It can be a natural science and also can be a social science. We have to study some behaviors in quantity. We want approximation, but we want to study some behaviors in quality, in length, in depth that we talk about. Let's move ahead. Now we will study the development of psychology. Where did it all started? How did it all come into existence? So, to psychologists in the beginning, an empirical approach to understand, psychology was taken as an empirical approach to understand thinking, imagery, consciousness. So, a lot of experiments were done to study your mental processes, which is divided into mind and brain. Also, your experiences, your behaviors. Gradually different approaches started coming up when the evolution started, that what is psychology all about. Psychology is the study of behavior, or it's the study of human mind. As moving from traditional to modern psychologist, it started moving from study of psychology as an explanation of behavior, then mental processes, then mind. So the first in evolution came up was structuralism. So when the development of psychology took place, the first perspective, we say, the first school of thought also in the development was called as structuralism. Let's focus on the term. Let's focus on the word structuralism, because that just tells a lot about this perspective. The main focus of structuralism was analyzing the basic structures of human mind. Structure is, what is it made up of? We are talking about what structure is making your mind and your behavior and your mental experiences. This view is known as structuralism. It is associated with William Wood and Edward Titchener. So, speaking of this, remember, when we talk about structuralism, we need to know that speaking of structuralism, it will always be talking about what? The structures of mind, the what's of the mind. What is the mind made up of? What is the behaviors made up of? So, this is viewed as structuralism. Who were associated as psychologists in there? It was William Wood. William Wood was the first psychologist to start with this perspective of structuralism, and then came Edward Titchener. What are the main points? Let's cluster the main points of this. So we are consciousness into parts. Structuralism stated that what do we need to focus on is the consciousness of the mind. Why the structures of mind? What are the structures? If we are talking about dealing and understanding psychology and the psyche, we need to understand what the mind is made up of. The other thing that structuralism, being the first perspective, being the first school, also did a very amazing thing. They gave a method to test psychology. That was too early to start with a method, but they did come up with a method called objective introspection. So let's understand what is introspection. Introspection in general English is to just speak out what you're feeling right now, isn't it? It's like introspect. Whenever children are getting scolded, teachers are always telling them, introspect what you've done wrong. So it's like going back to all the events that you've done to analyze it into understanding. It's called introspection. Also, the principles of psychology. So when we speak about introspection, we need to know there's something called principles of psychology, which was again given in the same perspective, which was the principles of psychology under structuralism. So let's point out the major things of structuralism was the psychologist. Psychologist was William Wood and Edward Titchener. Then we need to know it focuses on the consciousness. So we are not focusing on the past. We are not focusing on unconscious, pre-conscious. We're focusing on what is happening right now. Second thing, we're talking about introspection. Introspection was a method used. So when we speak about the method we talk about the way of understanding mind according to William Woon and Edward Titchener was to speak out what you're feeling. So it's like just the introspection needs to be put out on the ground, needs to be let out. So that was one, and one book was The Principles of Psychology, which held a lot of importance at that point of time. So this was the first, and now let's move to the next. The next came is functionalism. Functionalism did not come as any revolt. Functionalism came up on its own. So another amazing fact that we need to know: structuralism. Structuralism. William Moon, the first psychologist of structuralism, gave us a first lab also, which was in the Leipzig University, Germany. This was the first experimental lab of psychology, which was given by William Wood and Edward Tincher, the first person, and it was an experimental lab, which was in Leipzig University. Equally, the reason that I mentioned was functionalism also gave us a lab in Massachusetts, in Cambridge, and that was again a lab which was given by William James. William James was the holder for functionalism, like the one who takes the perspective ahead. So, how was functionalism very different from structuralism, and what was the, as it is coming in evolution, it is coming from traditional to modern psychology. What are the changes now? Functionalism stated that we cannot do with the what of the structures, the what of the mind. That will not be justifiable according to, when we speak about the study and understanding of the psyche. They viewed strongly the concept of Charles Darwin of natural selections, which is functionalists believe that this theory of Charles Darwin, the survival of fittest, can be applied to psychological characteristics, which is the focus of study was to understand the functions of mind and behavior. That suggests that speaking of understanding the psyche, you would not need the structures, you would not need the what, you would rather need the how. How is your mind functioning? What is the focus of study? Was the functions of mind and behavior. So, speaking of this, William James was the one who started this perspective, which was functionalism. He focused on the purpose and function of behavior. He also, another very important thing, Dewey stated a concept of adaptation of how and why. John Dewey was a psychologist who mentioned us that when we are speaking about the functions of mind, when we are speaking about how the psyche is, could be understood, the functions and the purpose of the behavior or the functions and the purpose of the mind can, help us support something which is functionalism. John Dewey stated that also we need to know that environment will involve the way we adapt to the environment, the survival of the fittest, the fact that we are able to move from one class to the other, the first grade to the other, the first year to the second year of college, from second year to the third year of college. Remember, that happens only on the basis of the way you adapt better than the other people. So the way you adapt in your environment tells a lot about your behavior, the psyche, the what and how and why of your behavior. The founder of functionalism was William James. He was also responsible for finding out one of the second most important, lab for psychology, which was in Massachusetts, Cambridge, and that was also an experimental lab. After functionalism came Gestalt. Gestalt came as a revolt against structuralism. Gestalt mentioned that structuralism was not of any great use. We cannot function by understanding the bits and pieces of your mind. If we come from the older concept and we go to the modern psychology, you will understand how everything is getting different. In a way, when you talk about it, it suggests that when we are talking about Gestalt mentioned that how can you understand the psyche of someone's brain or psyche of someone's mind by just knowing the pieces, the parts of their mind. So just knowing what they're feeling will tell you what they are. No, just by picking up one image from their mind, one structure from their mind, can you actually tell what they're feeling, what their psyche is all about? So Gestalt had a revolt against that. Gestalt psychology mentioned that this view was developed by German psychologists. Speaking of that, in terms of German psychologists, the Gestalt means unified whole. And when we talk about unified whole, the term Gestalt means unified whole. And the contributors were Max Wertheimer, Kafka, Wolfgang Kohler. And the main point of this was he focused on your perception. Perception talks about something which is an organized whole, something which is organized together and put up. So whole is better than the sum of the parts was Gestalt's. Understanding the whole, not putting your life into parts. So it's a revolt against structuralism. Structuralism stated that you can understand, human psyche by parts. So when we speak about that, when we speak about structuralism now seems incomplete. Now, when you focus on Gestalt, and Gestalt said that the focus is the whole, and the focus talks about we being understanding the human mind as a whole concept. So whole concept means all the feelings, all the experiences, all the ideations coming together will make up your mind. So speaking of that, the contributors here were Max Wertheimer, Kafka, Wolfgang Kohler, etc. These were the people who are founders of Gestalt. Now, the main point is focused on organized perception. So when we talk about the organized perception, it talks about whole is bigger than the sum of the part. Your experiences are holistic. And speaking of your experiences being holistic, is that everything can be understood as a whole. And also, when we talk about understanding your experience as holistic, remember this is a complete counter activity on structuralism. Now, Gestalt was a very brief account. They came with a very smaller aspect of understanding, and then came one of the most revolutionary concepts. So why do I mention it as revolutionary? It's revolutionary because it is still going on. We are still using it to understand human psyche. We're still using it to understand what the human brain and mind is comprising of. And also remember behaviorism, like the term suggests. Let's understand like with the term. Like we spoke about structuralism, functionalism, Gestalt. Behaviorism is understanding behaviors. The view of psychology is to study the behaviors. Now, according to behaviorism, again, Gestalt was of relevant use, and structuralism did not make sense to any of them. So the psychologist of behaviors, the contributors were John Watson. He was the founder of behaviorism, Bernard Frederick Skinner, and Ivan Pavlov. So these were the people who were responsible for something which is speaking of behaviorism. And also at the same time, we need to know that psychology could be best understood on the basis of behaviorists. So when we study the behaviors and the responses, it is objectively measured. I'll give you a very good example of this. Why behaviorism stated that they're far more scientific than any other, older perspective. As the modern psychology is going ahead, as we started from structuralism to functionalism to Gestalt, and behaviorism came as a very scientific method. Why? Stimulus response is the connotation and equation of behaviors. So stimulus can be anything. You feeling hot can be the stimulus. You doing a response as switching off the fan is a response. Response is something which is observable. So anything that can be observed, anything that can be seen becomes verifiable, becomes testable. And once it becomes verifiable and testable, remember, it is scientific. That's what behavior is all about. So according to behaviorism, behaviors are of great value. It is far more scientific. Also, The form of behavior that they ignored was covert, and the form of behavior they encouraged was overt. Overts are observable behavior. Let's chop down our entire understanding into 3 points. Psychology could be understood as a study of behaviors and responses. Why? Because behaviors are studied objectively. Behaviors can be understood better because they can be seen, they can be testified, and they can be checked. The focus is completely on overtness. The focus is not on covertness. We were not interested in what is happening as a covert behavior, but something which is overt is observable, something that is seen. Covert was covered. Covered behaviors are not put in emphasis. And the people who were responsible was Ivan Pavlov, which was Ivan Petrovich Pavlov, a physiologist turned psychologist who gave us length of theories on learning. He studies digestion by conditioning behaviors. The biggest theory that he gave was classical conditioning, which is followed by instrumental conditioning and further other kinds of learning. So behaviorism actually was a revolutionary part. It's being used even today. Psychologists even learn behaviorism even till today. So speaking of that, we need to know that because when we talk about the most radical headed thought was Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Solomon Freud was different from other people, different on their emphasis. It emphasized that, when speaking of human beings, they are not motivated by consciousness, they are not motivated by behaviors. So Sigmund Freud did not, negate anyone's experiences. But yes, Sigmund Freud did say that the other kind of learning and thoughts are not correct. He did mention that to understand human behavior, we need to go to the unconscious level of the mind. So the unconscious is something which cannot be seen, which cannot be derived, which cannot be read by people. And according to Sigmund Freud, all our human behaviors are a result of the unconscious wishes and desires that requires gratification, that requires satisfaction. So, according to Sigmund Freud, your human beings are functioning because of the unconscious, and the unconscious comprises of desires and wishes that needs immediate gratification. Gratification is satisfaction. What was his important, task that he had completed? Sigmund Freud had did a length of things. He did child experiences, very important. That was also methods given by him of free association and dream interpretation. These were his methods of interpreting human mind. Now let's move ahead. After psychoanalysis, which was a method by Sigmund Freud, we came to humanistic approach, a very positive approach. It was also called as the third force in psychology, focused on people's ability to direct their own lives. And humanistics such as Carl Rogers and Rahim Maslow emphasized on free will of human beings and natural striving to grow self-actualization, which suggests that humanistic, like the term suggests, let's understand the terms that they have given are very, very relatable. Humanism is being more closer to human beings, free will, having the free will to choose what they want to do, take responsibility and onus. So, focused on people's ability to direct their own life, taking responsibility of their own lives. Two people responsible, Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, focus that we have that innate need to grow. So we have that free will and that natural striving. Natural striving means we have that innate need to keep growing from one level to the other level and to the other level, which will lastly will leave us with something which is called a self-actualization. I'll give you a beautiful example for this that will very relatable to all of us. When we achieve a task, our achievement doesn't finish there. Once that task is achieved, you want to move to another task. You want to move to another task. You want to move to another task. So remember, when we talk about achievement of tasks, it just keeps moving from one to the other to the other. Why? Because we have that natural striving. You have probably become the third position of your class. Now you would wish to be the second position of your class. After the second, when you feel that I am capable, you want to be the first. And once you being the first, remember, you want to go ahead. You want to probably go ahead and be a part of a higher level of competition that's possible. So that is something which talks about humanism, free will, very positive. They have a very positive outlook towards human being. They felt that we have the ability and the onus of directing our own lives. Also, they emphasize that self-actualization is something that we all are striving for. And one of the last perspective that we will talk about is cognitive perspective. Cognitive perspective had completely changed as modern psychology because cognitive perspective is quite new. Also, all of this started in 1800s. Cognitive perspective was 1910 and 15. So where they were speaking about intelligence, language, attention, memory, problem solving, decision making. So these are all cognitive processes. What is cognition? The process of thinking. Anything that comes in the process of thinking, which is memory, intelligence, language, problem solving, was the the core of psychology at this time. Also, were the main contributors Hermann Ebbinghaus and Sir Frederick Bartlett. Some main points: there was an extensive, detailed study done on the concept of memory, that human mind is like a computer, which is very true. Why is it not? So when we talk about human mind, don't you feel that, like cognition, you think, you perceive, you learn, you store it, and you take it out whenever there is a class test or a test, right? Now let's move to another same concept of computers. You open the computers, you put something down in a Word document, you use it, you save it, and by the name later you retrieve it. So don't you feel the both have the same functions? So human mind was seen as like computers, and it was a very very active and very relevant as a perspective, which is cognitive perspective. Then we came multiple perspective like social cultural perspective. These were very in perspective that talked about that the human mind could be understood by the social and the cultural factors that influences their behavior. So social psychologists mentioned that the Western culture is very individualistic, and the Asian being the more the Asian culture is not like the Western culture. It's more collectivistic. They talk about harmonious being staying together. Some of the contributors here were Leon Festinger, their theories of cognitive dissonance, etc. After social cultural perspective, we have biological perspective that is concerning that our behavior and our psyche is an outproduct of behaviors and mental processes. So this perspective was inspired by Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin mentioned that we all know Charles Darwin's theory was natural selection, which is survival of the fittest. The process of adaptation makes us better than the others. We are able to adapt better. Behavioral predisposition or tendencies such as aggression, etc., is determined by genes, and it's transferred from one generation to the other. However, the second generation uses it better, the better it's going to be utilized. So that finishes with something which was evolutionary perspective. Let's come to the major fields of psychology. Why there's a need to study in terms of the major fields of psychology? The reason for so is we need to know that, speaking of the fields, psychology has increased in leaps and bounds. And when speaking of that, we need to know that psychology is now not restricted to the study of mind. It is also restricted to something which is emphasis on, it has that emphasis not just on human mind, but also branches that can study human mind in different perspective. So speaking of that, we have some sub fields that we have is clinical neuropsychology. We have counseling, we have health psychology, school psychology is coming at a greater level that we talk about. And we have cognitive developmental psychology, so vibrant. You can just see the stats for a while and check. The maximum amount of stats is focusing today on clinical psychology, being the need of the hour. Then we have clinical neuroscience. We have counseling at a greater level. 47% is restricted and being consumed by clinical psychology. So you can please go through the image that we have it on the left. Now, as you've seen the image on the left and you realize that here there are not one field but multiple fields. So we realize psychology has multi-folds of subfields because of the knowledge, not only because of the knowledge, but also today we see because of the application. Also, as we need to know that psychology has not only have researches but also application which has come to a greater level. So some of the new fields that you will find here is, you can see that 1% of health, the psychologist, the forensic, etc., all of that thing is somewhere the new fields that we can find. Let's move ahead. Let's understand the research method. So speaking of that, let's understand what is the main theme of psychology. So the theme of psychology we need to know is research and application. Psychology always comes with that ideation. The study of mind will always come with that ideation, that you need to study the mind with the help of researching. Once you research, you will be able, we have the capacity to apply it, the capacity to use it, utilize it to understand human mind, to rectify human mind, to control, and then further support the human mind. So research are the integral part of psychology. Why? It is because research makes the subject scientific, makes it more non-biased. The numbers quantify things. They make up theories. The theories are generalized over people. So there are 4 goals or assumptions that all investigators not do not follow all. We need to know there are some goals which are for the investigators, but we need to know not all investigators will follow. So if there's an investigator of clinical, you might not follow, but most of the investigators will follow all of these goals and assumptions. So let's begin. And the image is also on the, on the other side. Let's understand, and I'll give you an understanding of the goals. See, the first goal is describing behavior, explaining behavior, predicting and changing behavior. Let's take an example of this. We want to describe a behavior, hours impact performance. So that is describing behavior. I need to understand what are they doing. They are increasing their number of hours or they're reducing their number of hours. So what are the number of hours? How it is utilized? What is its capacity? What is the number? Is it 5 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours? It is 7 hours. And then what are we explaining? Second comes the explanation of behavior. We are explaining does number of hour impact something, something which we talk about in terms of, when we speak about explanation, does performance is impacted by hours of study and education. So if it is impacted, we need to know, we need to explain this. Strategizing, timetabling would be included in studying in the number of hours. Performance will be including excellence, good performance, bad performance, targeted performance. So we need to explain why are they doing that. They're doing it to score better. So the number of hours are added to score better. So we need to realize if we reduce the number of hours, which will in the explanation of behavior, if we reduce the number of hours, will that also at the same time reduce the performance, reduce the kind of performance that we are doing? So this includes this. When we're talking about this does include something which is explaining of behavior. After you're able to explain behavior, completely, what is the cause and what is the effect, you need to know what you need to explain further. Can you predict behavior? Let's take you have taken 20 kids who have been studying day and night, and out of the 20, the 5 are not. The 5 are not well prepared. They're not given the number of hours, which is description of behavior. They're not giving any kind of number of hours. They are not, associating their learning to timetabling. They are giving 1 hour in comparison to 15 are giving 8 hours, etc. Remember, the kind of learning that we will find is that we will understand that prediction of behavior can be done when it's described and explained well. So once we understand the cause of the behavior, when we talk about this, we need to know the more that we study, the more that we perform. So if we have explained and described the behavior well, we will understand the impact can be seen. What happens if that doesn't happen? So if a child is able to study more, plan out more, he or she will be able to put it out. He or she will be able to put it out. So if you're, for example, when we talk about children studying 5 hours, scheduling themselves, scoring a 90%, children studying 1 hour, not being able to devise that time, would not be able to score better. So speaking of that, changing of behavior can only happen when we're able to predict it well. So let's take an example again. We find that children who have been performing well are the ones who are scheduling themselves, timetabling themselves for 5 hours a day. So that means they're able to study an extra 5 hours apart from their college or schools and performing better. So this has been happening in prediction because we understood in terms of describing of behavior. This will be able to help us changing behavior of the students who are the 5 who are not studying. So we realize that there is an impact of study hours on your behavior. I'll give you another example for this. Let's understand, we want to see the consumption of coffee and concentration of human mind. So consumption of coffee is something which is description of behavior and also the concentration of human mind. Concentration will talk about focus, it will talk about attention, the kinds of attention. Coffee consumption will talk about what coffee is a stimulant, what does it do to human mind, that is describing the behavior. Now let's explain. Explain will talk about the cause and effect. What is the cause here? The consumption of coffee is the cause, because if we increase and decrease it, it might impact the attention. So let's take an example. We've picked up 40 odd people and we feel we've given 20 people caffeine. We've not given the other 20 people caffeine. And in this, we find that people who've been taking caffeine are far more vigilant, strong-headed, being able to perform better and put themselves out better. So this is prediction of behavior. As you're able to predict because of seeing the kind of explanation of behavior that 20% of 20 people out of the 40 who are consuming coffee has an 80% of attention, has an impact. So once we know the prediction, we can change what we want to. We can probably include caffeine in people's beverage or try and substitute it with something better, give them activities that keeps them far more vigilant. Now the change in behavior can only happen because we are able to describe, explain, predict behaviors well. This is a simple phenomena that psychology works with in terms of the four goals. Now let's understand the seven psychological steps of researches that we are given below. I'll go to the image again, which is on the left hand side, the peach color image that you see. So let's take an example. We want to conduct a research. How are psychological research conducted in psychology? It is conducted with seven odd steps that we have. So the first step is identification of a research problem. So let's take an example. The research problem can be that, the impact of social media use on aggression. So this is something that we want to study. This is the identification of a problem. We have conceptualized a problem. So that is something which is impact of social media or use of social media impacting on child's aggression. Now constructing a hypothesis. What is constructing a hypothesis? Let's understand what's a hypothesis. Hypothesis is a tentative answer to the question problem. So we can make multiple hypotheses. It's a tentative answer to the research problem. So it could be something which is more the use of social media, more is aggression in children, lesser the use of social media, lesser is the aggression. Also, use of social media has no impact on aggression, which is like there is no relationship between the two, or higher the use of social media and lower is the aggression. We can have multiple hypotheses. So what does the hypothesis does? Hypothesis is a tentative solutions to our research problems that guides our research, that gives direction to our research. So we have multiple of these that we have. So speaking of this, we construct a hypothesis. Once you construct a hypothesis, remember you will be able to design the method, what you want to do. So you want to do that I want to study people's aggression. So you need to pick up children from the data collection starts in. So in data collection, which is the step 3, you need to understand while collecting data, what kind of data do you need? Do you need children? What is the age group? Is there a gender specific research that you're doing? Or are you picking up both girls and boys? What class are these children coming from? What kind of region are they coming from? So this is like designing the method where you talk about data collection, technique that needs to be used. Are you going to use observation, interview schedules, or questionnaire method, or you want to conduct an experiment? So that's designing of the method, which is one of the most important method. After that comes collection of data. Collection of data would be talking about how do you want to collect this data? How do you want to collect the information from children? Do you want to observe? Do you want to collect data in terms of verbatims? You want to do it in a questionnaire? So it's collection. Once the data is collected through any of the technique, any data collection method, case study, observation, it could be questionnaires and interview, all of this when got together, we will be able to analyze data. Now, analysis of data takes place between two. As we studied the natural and the social science the last time, analysis also happens in two ways. How? Analysis can be quantitative. Quantitative is statistical analysis, which is using numbers, using bar diagrams. We are using mean, median, mode, and standard deviation. So it's more analytical, more approximate, and accurate. Speaking of another analysis of data in the step 5, could be qualitative analysis. That could be observation, case studies. They are equally accurate, but lesser approximation, and they are high, rich quality of information. You have primary data, you have secondary data, you have a huge amount of data list that you have. Then we talk about interpreting the data. Interpretation can happen by your qualitative ways or quantitative ways. It could be reflected on the pie chart, on the bar diagram, and you then write out your results. Report your findings. Which hypothesis got accepted is something that you need to report. Is it the first, second, or third? If you found that children who are using far amount of social media has more aggression, please quote that the interpretation of data states that the hypothesis one is accepted and the others are completely rejected. That's the reporting of the research finding. I'll just read the 7 steps again. When we want to conduct a psychological research, the first is identification of the research problem, constructing a hypothesis, designing of the method, collection of data, analysis of data, interpretation of data, then writing your report, which is the final step, putting theoretically the entire report on your research. That completes with steps of conduction of your psychological research. Your steps. So when we speak about the steps, remember, it talks about three steps of, three types of methods used in research and psychology. They are descriptive methods, experimental method, and correlational method. So speaking of that, descriptive methods are the ones which are mentioned here, where you're able to describe what are surveys, observation, and case study. Experimental methods are the methods where you're able to identify the relationship between two variables, which is cause and effect. Correlation is when you find out the relationship between two variables. So let's understand the descriptive methods: observation, surveys, and case study. Interviews. Interviews are of two types when we talk about, and when we speak about interviews, interviews are structured interviews and unstructured interviews, and there are some which are semi-structured under the surveys. Structured interviews under the surveys are ones which are having a predetermined set of questions, which is the set of questions are already defined. You have a time target, and you do not ask more than 5 questions which are written. The unstructured methods are the ones that talks about that speaks of the fact that when we speak about unstructured, the questions are not predetermined. You can make the question in front of the interviewee, so you have 2 questions in hand. That 2 can become 5, that 5 can become 10. It consumes a lot of time. It's time consuming. There's a lot of what do you call that, labor intensive. A person need to stick to that participant for a long time. And with semi structured, it's a mix of two. You have 10 questions that you have a time target, but you can even include more questions as the flexibility of the kind of answers that are being given. So other kind of descriptive method is observation. Observation is ideally one of the most powerful tool. It is utilizing and observing and then recording it and analyzing it. So observation are also of multiple type. We have naturalistic observation, lab-like observation. Naturalistic observation is observation that is happening in the natural environment, and lab is controlled when you create a condition and a situation. Then we have participant and non-participant. Such a good example. Participant observation is where you are participating in the group and observing. Non-participant is like watching it from far. People don't know that you're being observed. Also, cameras tend to be a participant observation. So cameras are a little participant because we are aware that they're watching us. By using multiple methods, which is gathering information by primary, secondary data, you can talk about take information from their parents, their colleagues. You can do a rating scale with them, take an interview, put out a questionnaire about details. So case study is one of those methods which utilize a lot of other descriptive methods within it. Then to summarize this descriptive research methods, to study psychology scientifically, 3 methods are always going to be used. We have experimental method, the systematic observation, and correlation. So this is researches that has been quoted that this will always be utilized no matter what. So then let's talk about a little bit here some terms that we need to note. What is a stimuli? Any object or event that evokes a response. Let's take an example. A light can be a stimuli. Once you start flickering, it is giving us lights. We want a dimmer light, we can switch it off. We want a brighter light, we can put it on. What is a variable? Variable is any object, event, thing, and situation that varies, whose values keeps varying. So that's something which is a variable. Now moving ahead, we are going to dive into understanding what is an experimental method. One of the most important method of psychology is experimental method. Also keeping in mind, when we talk about experimental method, it is identifying the relationship between cause and effect. So establishing 2 variables, identifying the relationship involving manipulation. So let's take the same example, the impact of social media on aggression. So there are 2 variables according to the experimental method involved in the manipulation: cause and effect. Cause is the independent variable and effect is the dependent variable. So independent variable is the one which is manipulated by the experimenter, and the effect of independent variable is seen on the dependent variable. So that's how it becomes cause and effect. A similar example, too much of television viewing and its impact on aggressive tendency, caffeine consumption on concentration. So these are so many things where anything that can be manipulated, put up and down, is the cause. And the thing that we are studying and its impact being seen is dependent variable. The effect is always the dependent variable. There are two kind of design which we find in experimental method. One is the controlled design and one is the experimental design. So speaking of that, a controlled design is where we are able to control the the independent variables. So let's take an example. We have two rooms. In one room is experimental design room and the other is the control design room. The control design room will not have the independent variable. So children sitting in the control room will not have television to view, whereas in the experimental group the independent variable is manipulated. So when the independent variable is manipulated, remember the television would be too light, too less, too high. So experimental group and experimental group is usually the ones where the independent variable is manipulated. To have a quick review, experimental method is that method that involves the relation between cause and effect, which is two variables manipulated in the independent variable is seen on dependent variable. It's the effect that you study. So aggression is being studied, concentration is being studied. So anything that's being studied is called the effect. Now, let's move to correlational design that we have. This designs that we have. When the information is collected about the two variable, it identifies the relationship between the two. So the two variables on one sample from two samples on one variable of interest. So correlation method is used there. This method tries to understand the correlation or relationship that exists between two set of scores. So extroverts are happier than introverts are happier than extroverts. So this is the relationship between more happiness, more extroversion. It's a positive relationship. Lesser happiness and lesser introversion is again positive. So according to them, the relationship is seen in terms of direction and quality. Quality is positive, negative. Direction is something which talks about the direction of the two variables. Like if we talk about people who tend to socialize more are more happier. So more socialization, more happiness. So quality is positive. The direction is same. So one variable goes up, the other equally goes up. One variable goes down, the other equally goes down. Whereas the negative is the quality, talks about both the variables are moving in opposite direction. That means more that you drink food, lesser it is your fitness. The more that you drink aerated food, junk food that you eat, the more junk and aerated drinks that you have, lesser is your fitness. So one goes up, the other goes down. That's the direction, and the quality is negative. And remember, correlation varies from +1 to -1, which is +1 is the highest and -1 is the negative. Let's talk about the ethical principles. They're one of the most important things that we need to know. Ethics of principles are one of the most important things that we need to discuss. Let's talk about each of them in the picture, one by one. Integrity. Competence. Integrity competence is keeping the integrity of your clients safe, which is making sure that you respect the client with utmost values. Competence is about the psychologist or the researcher. Remember, when we are talking about the psychologist, we need to know that the competence of the psychologist should be of so, or the researcher should be of so that he is able to conduct the research. It should not be done unethically. The competence should not be low. The qualification could not be low. Then we talk about beneficence. Beneficence is that the research that we are conducting, the research that is being conducted should be of benefit to the researcher and to the experimenter also. So if you're doing an experiment on a child, remember he or she should get a benefit out of it. He should learn something out of it. And non-maleficence is there should be no harm and any intent of disgrace to the subject. So there should be no maleficence, which is we should not exploit our client. We should not exploit our research, experimentee. We should make sure we tell them all the information. We give them the informed consent, take the informed consent from them, take all the agreements, make sure we maintain dignity of the relationship that we have, make sure that there is no other relationship that is formed between the experimenter and experimentee. One of the most important thing, there is a high sense of autonomy. Your research experimentee can always, participants say a no. You should be honest to them, take responsibility of their results. High amount of privacy and confidentiality to be maintained. Please make sure you will not discuss the result of your experimentee or your participants to multiple people. You can just not go to them and talk about them. So please make sure that there is confidentiality. You've supported the confidentiality. Also make sure that you have maintained the details and not shared it with any other. Only under some circumstances, which is circumstances of emergency and requirement, should be shared. Otherwise, all the details should be private. So let's run through them again. High competence of the experiment. You choose and decide, informed consent, privacy maintained, confidentiality. Please be justifying the participant, should be dignified with them, and there should be benefit, which is beneficence, and non-beneficence, no harm to the participant while doing the research. That completes with some ethical principles that we need to take care of when few last things that we have. So now let's understand when we have an internal, a complete understanding of where its psychology is influenced by very good theories, Western concepts and theories, very good ideologies. Also, psychology started initially in the University of Calcutta in 1916, and initiation again happened to be an experimental lab. Always in psychology, an experimental lab was always, conducted and used before. Dr. N. Singh Gupta in the University of Calcutta was one of our first faculty. He was also a Harvard trainer scholar, and also N. Singh Gupta was a student of William Wood, which was coming from structuralism. So N. Singh Gupta also was, responsible for responsible for learning psychology from William Wood, also understanding the concept of structuralism, the concept of evolution starting from day one. Also, Professor G. Bose was the first Indian psychoanalysis to study Freudian thoughts, which was a blend of Freudian thoughts and the Indian concept. So, Professor G. Bose had was also indulging into psychoanalysis to study Freudian thoughts, and he tried to use Indian ideology in the psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud, which is understanding the unconscious thoughts and feelings, understanding where is it coming from, what are the unconscious thoughts of Indians, what is the kind of gratification that Indian feelings have, and it was blended in the concept of being a Hindu with a Freudian concept. And Sinha has great contribution to psychology. Psychology started then in Aligarh University, then it started in Madras University. Then there was NIMHANS was started in Bangalore in 1974. So the National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience was started in 1974. Similarly, we have WIMHANS in New Delhi, which is Vidyasagar Institute. So equally, which was latter, far latter than the NIMHANS. NIMHANS was started in 1974. Also, the psychology of India focuses human behavior using more the same theories, we use the same concept, but we applied it into a more Hindi or a more Indian concept and a more, values, socio-cultural features, which was Indian. So the change always happens. So let's take an example. We pick up a learning concept, the kind of learning, the kind of concept of gurus and shishyas that we have. So there was a change in psychology in India. Remember, we are greatly influenced by Western theories and concepts, but we started our first university in Calcutta. And later, one of the first few universities were Aligarh, Madras. We had Utkal University also, which was one of the center core for psychology. So this suggests what is psychology in India. And today, psychology in India is growing in leaps and bounds. We would want to go to the fields that we were talking about and tell you that how psychology has increased in these fields. Clinical psychology is growing, counseling is growing in leaps and bounds. Clinical neuropsychology is increasing in India also. School and educational psychology have now become two different branches. Educational being the bigger role, and school is something which is growing at a greater level. We have special education also, which is coming. Industrial and organizational psychology is also hitting its boom. Developmental psychology are closely associated with special eds. We have social and personality, cognitive. Health psychology is of great need in today's world. Why? Because of fatalistic diseases happening to our people. Larger number of cancer-aided patients, HIV patients, patients of germs and viruses, and people going for major surgeries in of different ages and lifetime and lifestyle requires a health counselor. Requires that moral building of the health counselor. Requires that support and of the health counselors. And some of the new ones, as we said, is sports psychology. Community is increasing at greater level. The services which are non-governmentally provided by people, given to people and appreciated by people. So this is something that we talk about in terms of the few major fields. So psychology is increasing in India in a greater level. So we come from contemporary psychology of Western world, molded according to the Indian concept and understood in the accordance of India. So let's take an overview of what we did today. We understood what is psychology. We understood the nature of psychology being natural and social science. We understood the different evolutionary perspective. We talk about starting it from structuralism, going to socio-cultural and biological evolutionary perspective. We spoke about that psychology's major to concern is research and application. So, how are researchers happening? We talk about the steps. We spoke about the goals and also some of the major steps of research, which is descriptive research methods, correlation, and experimental. Experimental is of greater deal. After that, you understand that you know what are the steps you understood while data collection or anything interacting with participants. What are the ethical concepts? What are the ethical reviews? The ethical thoughts that you need to principles that you need to keep in mind. Speaking of all of this, we also spoke about how psychology has grown in India. So, coming from a Western theory and concept, we are modulating it into more Asian ways and more Asian thoughts, utilizing it in more Indian perspective. So, that completes with understanding the foundation of psychology today.